My daughter's teacher bullied her into silence, until I taught him what silence really meant. And I want to tell you about the 4 months I spent gathering evidence before the school board meeting where I read aloud the names of the 11 other students he had been doing this to. My daughter is named Whitney. Whitney is 12. Whitney is in 6th grade. Whitney's teacher was a man named Mr. Hendrik Marlowe. Mr. Marlowe had been teaching 6th grade for 19 years. Mr. Marlowe had been known as the strict teacher who got results. The thing he had been doing was specific. Mr. Marlowe had been selecting one student per class to be his target for the year. The target was always a girl. The target was always a girl who was bright and outspoken. Mr. Marlowe had been spending the year systematically silencing her. Mr. Marlowe had been calling on her constantly when she had been not raising her hand. Mr. Marlowe had been making her answers wrong even when they had been right. Mr. Marlowe had been mocking her contributions in front of the class. Whitney had been the target this year. Whitney came home from school on a Tuesday in October and I tried to talk to her. That sounds like nothing. But you have to understand who Whitney was before this. Whitney was the kid who walked through the front door talking. Whitney was the kid who would start telling me about her day before she even put her backpack down. Whitney had opinions about everything. She had something to say about the color of the sky. That Tuesday in October, Whitney walked in the door, put her backpack on the hook, sat down at the kitchen table, and said nothing. I put a snack in front of her. She picked at it. I said, "How was school?" Whitney said, "Fine." I said, "What did you do today?" Whitney said, "Nothing." Whitney was not sulking. She was not giving me attitude. This was different. Whitney was flat. There is no other word for it. She was like someone had gone into her and turned the volume all the way down. I went to the school. It was parent-teacher conference night about 2 weeks later. I asked every single one of her teachers the same question. Has anything changed with Whitney this year? Most of them gave me the same look. A little tilt of the head, a little shrug. Whitney was quiet but fine. The last classroom on my list was Octavia's. Octavia was young. She was in her 2nd year of teaching. When I sat down across from her, she looked at me differently than the other teachers had. She looked like she wanted to say something. She looked like she was trying to decide if she could. She got up, walked over to the open door of her classroom, and closed it. The click of that door closing is a sound I will never forget because it was the sound of everything changing. She sat back down and she said, "I need to tell you something about Mr. Marlowe's class, but I need you to understand that I could lose my job for saying this." My whole body went still. I said, "Tell me." Octavia told me what she had been hearing through the shared wall between her classroom and Hendrik Marlowe's. She told me about Marlowe calling on Whitney when Whitney had not raised her hand every single day. She said, "He says things like, 'Oh, Whitney thinks she knows the answer again,' and he says it in this voice that makes the whole class laugh. It's not a joke, it's a weapon, and he does it every single day, and it's only her." Octavia's hands were shaking a little. She said, "He picks one girl every year." I felt the floor move. I asked her, "How long has this been happening?" Octavia said, "I've only been here 2 years, but I heard him do the same thing to a different girl last year." I asked a retired teacher about it once, and she just shook her head and said, "That's just how he is." I asked, "Why hasn't anyone reported this?" Octavia said, "He has 19 years of tenure and the best test scores in the district. Nobody wants to be the one who goes after him." I drove home. When I got to my driveway, I pulled in and I turned off the engine and I just sat there. 10 minutes, maybe more. I was thinking, I could go to the principal, but a private meeting with the principal would mean a private burial. I could go to the district office, but the district had let Marlowe teach for 19 years with the best scores in their system. Every official channel was designed to make this go away quietly. So I made a decision. I was going to build a case so complete, so full of names and dates and details, that none of them could look away. I started the next night. I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop open, and I pulled up the school's alumni directory. I started with the most recent class lists and worked my way backward. I made a list. I started making phone calls. The first 3 calls got me nothing. I sat there staring at my list and I felt something cold settle into my chest. Doubt. Maybe Octavia was wrong. Maybe I was the overprotective mom everyone thought I was. But I thought about Whitney sitting at that kitchen table saying fine and nothing, and I picked up the phone and I made the 4th call. A woman answered. I told her my name. I asked, "Did your daughter ever have any issues with him?" There was silence on the other end, the kind of silence where someone is trying to decide whether they can survive saying it. Then she said, "Why are you asking me this?" I said, "Because my daughter stopped talking." The woman on the phone started crying. She said, "My daughter stopped talking too. She was 13. She's 19 now and she's still in therapy." I gripped the edge of my kitchen table so hard my fingers hurt. I kept calling. I went through the list year by year, family by family. The pattern was so exact it made me sick. 1 girl per year. Always bright, always outspoken, always destroyed by June. I talked to a father one evening who had to stop twice during our conversation. His daughter had dropped out of high school. He said, "We spent years trying to figure out what happened to her. She used to be the loudest kid in every room. After 6th grade, she just disappeared into herself." He asked, "How many others are there?" I looked at my folder. I said, "You're number 7. He said, 7, like he was trying to make the number real in his head. By the time I had reached out to about 60 families, I had 11 confirmed cases on top of Whitney's. Somewhere around family number 8 or 9, I called Dakota. Dakota is my closest friend. She is the kind of friend who doesn't tell you what you want to hear. She tells you what you need to hear. I told her everything. When I was done, Dakota said, "Okay, what do you need from me?" She came over the next day. She helped me organize everything. We were sitting on my living room floor surrounded by paper when Dakota looked at me and said, "You know they're going to come after you for this." I said, "They can come. I have 11 families and 140 pages." Around this time, I reached out to the retired teacher Octavia had mentioned. We met at a coffee shop on a Saturday morning. She sat down across from me, and before I even finished explaining why I was there, she said, "I knew something was off with him for years. I watched girls go into his class one way and come out another way. Every year, the same thing. But he had tenure. He had scores. And I was a coward." She wrote a statement that afternoon. One night, late, after Whitney was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table and I went through the whole folder from front to back. I found a pattern I hadn't noticed because I had been so focused on the individual stories. 6 of the 11 girls were currently in therapy for issues that started in 6th grade. 4 had documented anxiety disorders. 2 had dropped out of high school. And 1 girl had attempted suicide at 15. She was 15 years old. 3 years after sitting in Hendrik Marlowe's classroom, I closed the folder. I sat there in my kitchen with the light buzzing above me. I opened the folder again. 12 tabs, 12 girls, 12 families who trusted me with the worst thing that ever happened to their kid. I made my decision the next morning. I was not going to take this folder to the principal's office. I was going to take it to the next public school board meeting, where there would be a microphone and a public comment period that they could not shut down. But I couldn't do it alone. One angry mom with a folder is easy to dismiss. 12 families sitting together in the front rows is not. I called every single one of the 11 families. 9 of them said yes right away. One father said, "Tell me where to be and I'll be there an hour early." 2 of the mothers were not so sure. One of them called me back and her voice was careful. She said, "What if they turn this around on us? What if they say we're just angry parents?" I said, "That's why there are 12 of us. They can dismiss 1. They cannot dismiss 12. She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said, "Okay, I'll be there." 3 days before the meeting, my phone rang. It was the principal. She said, "I understand you've been contacting families of former students and making some serious claims about one of our teachers. I'd like to invite you in for a private meeting to discuss your concerns." A private meeting meant a private burial. I kept my voice calm. I said, "I appreciate the offer, but I'll be sharing my concerns at the board meeting on Thursday." There was a pause. When the principal spoke again, the warmth was gone. She said, "I really think this would be better handled internally." I said, "Respectfully, it has been handled internally for 19 years. That's the problem." The night before the meeting, I was at the kitchen table reading through my statement one more time when I heard a sound behind me. Whitney was standing in the doorway in her pajamas. She looked at the papers on the table. She said, "What are you doing?" I put the papers down. She was 12 years old and she was standing there with her arms pulled tight against her body like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. I said, "I'm going to a meeting at your school tomorrow night. I'm going to talk about what Mr. Marlowe did to you, and I'm going to make sure he never does it to anyone else." Whitney's eyes filled with tears. She said, "He told me I was the problem. He said if I just stopped trying to show off, things would be easier." I got out of my chair and I kneeled down in front of her. I took her hands. I said, "You were never the problem. You were never showing off. You were being exactly who you are, and he tried to take that from you. I am not going to let him keep it." Whitney leaned forward and put her head against my shoulder, and I held her there. The morning of the meeting, my phone rang at 7:15. It was Octavia. She was scared. She said, "Someone told Marlowe that parents have been calling around about him. He came to my classroom today and asked me if I had been talking to anyone. I told him no, but I don't think he believed me." I said, "Did he threaten you?" Octavia said, "Not directly, but he stood in my doorway for a long time and said, 'People who make accusations they can't prove tend to have very short careers.'" I closed my eyes. This man who had spent 19 years breaking girls and getting away with it was now standing in a young teacher's doorway trying to scare her into silence too. The same play, the same weapon, silence. I said, "After tonight, he will not be in a position to threaten anyone. Can you be at the meeting?" There was a pause. Then she said, "I'll be there." The room was full when I walked in. About 70 people. The 11 families were already there, spread across the first 2 rows just like we planned. I spotted Octavia in the very back row, tucked into a corner seat. The board chair opened the public comment period and called my name first. I stood up. My legs felt strange, like they belonged to someone else, but they carried me to the microphone. I said, "I am the mother of a 6th grader at this school. 4 months ago, my daughter stopped speaking, not just in class, at home, at dinner, everywhere. My daughter, who used to argue with me about everything, who had an opinion about the color of the sky, went silent. I am here tonight to tell you why." The room got quiet. I started with Whitney. I told them about the time Marlowe called on her when she hadn't raised her hand and said, "Oh, you don't know? I thought you knew everything." I told them about the time Whitney got an answer right, and Marlowe said, "Even a broken clock is right twice a day," and the whole class laughed. I told them about the time Whitney finally stopped raising her hand altogether, and Marlowe looked at her and said, "Finally, some peace and quiet." Then I said, "My daughter is not the only one. Mr. Marlowe has been doing this for at least a decade. He selects 1 girl per year. She is always bright. She is always outspoken. And by June, she is always silent." I let that sit in the air. Then I said, "I am going to read the names now." I read Whitney's name first. Then I read the second name and the incident her family had given me. Then the third name and her incident. One by one, name after name, each one with a specific moment that could not be explained away. By the 6th name, a mother in the front row was crying quietly. By the 8th name, one of the board members put her hand over her mouth and left it there. By the 10th name, my voice was steady, but my hands were shaking so hard I had to press the paper flat against the podium. I read the 11th name. I read the 12th name. Then I said, 6 of these 12 girls are currently in therapy for issues that started in 6th grade. 4 have documented anxiety disorders. 2 dropped out of high school. 1 attempted suicide at 15. She was 15 years old and she tried to end her life because a man in this building spent a year teaching her that her voice did not matter." I picked up the folder and I walked it to the board's table and I set it down right in front of the chair. I said, "This folder contains 140 pages of documentation, statements from all 12 families, a written statement from a current teacher at this school, a written statement from a retired teacher who suspected this for a decade and did not know what to do. I am asking this board to act, not internally, not quietly, in a way that protects these girls." I walked back to my seat. The room was silent, the kind where the air itself feels like it's holding its breath. Then one of the fathers in the front row stood up. He didn't walk to the microphone. He didn't say a word. He just stood. Then another parent stood. Then another. One by one, the 11 families rose to their feet and stood there in silence, looking at the board. Nobody had to speak. The board chair cleared his throat and said the matter would be referred for immediate investigation. After the meeting ended, the principal walked up to me. She had this look on her face like she was the one who had been wronged. She said, "You could have come to me first." I looked at her for a long time. I said, "I did come to teachers first. I came to every teacher in that building. One of them was brave enough to tell me the truth. The rest of them knew, or they should have known, and they said nothing, just like you." She held my gaze for about 2 seconds. Then she turned and walked away without another word. Octavia was standing a few feet behind me. She was holding her bag against her chest with both arms, and she looked like she had been crying. She said, "He's going to be placed on leave by morning, isn't he?" I said, "Yes." Octavia said, "Thank you for not making me do this alone." I said, "You didn't make my daughter do it alone either. You were the only one who spoke." Hendrik Marlowe was placed on administrative leave the next morning. The investigation took 6 weeks and it confirmed everything in my folder plus more incidents I had never even discovered. Marlowe was terminated. His teaching credential was revoked. The 11 families filed a civil suit and the district settled it. The settlement was substantial and it included funding for ongoing therapy for all 12 girls. Whitney has been seeing Dr. Akandi twice a week and she has started raising her hand again, not just in class, but everywhere. She argued with me last week about what to have for dinner, and she argued passionately and loudly, and I let her win because that sound, my daughter's voice filling up a room again, was the only thing I had been fighting for. Hendrik Marlowe spent 19 years teaching girls to be silent. It took one mother, one brave young teacher, and 11 families to teach him what silence really means. His classroom is empty now, his name is in a file, and Whitney's voice is back. That is the only ending that matters.